I'm going to give you 6 reasons that why it is unlikely that evolution has have happened. Uh, it is undoubtedly that modern scientific inventions and the technological advancement and the researches have challenged religious beliefs, and it has threatened faith at large.
Hello again from Atheistic Snail. I didn't intend to finish another video so fast, but the weather sucks here, so I was able to get this done a little sooner than expected. Don't get used to it, I'm really slow. One little point, views challenge, before we go into your video. You title it 6 Reasons Evolution is Unlikely to Have Happened, but you only list 5 in your description box. I think that was probably a typo when you typed up your description and you combined 2 reasons into number 3 on your list. Just wanted to point that out in case anybody's confused looking at the list and listening to me. That having been said, let's move on to your actual arguments.
So my first reason is that up till this day we are still visited by hideous diseases, and in most cases they take our lives. Notwithstanding all of the um, uh, all of the scientific facilities that modern man enjoys. So the question is that, I mean, it is because of the malnutrition that children are dying worldwide. It's just because of the contaminated water that we still suffer renal diseases. So just imagine of the primitive man, of the primeval man, how come he would have survived all these situations, all these life-taking diseases. So this is my first point. Just imagine a man 2 million years ago, how he would have survived all these diseases that we cannot survive even today.
In an attempt to make sure I understand what you were asking, I'm going to attempt to summarize it here. If I'm following you correctly, you are saying that because historically humans would not have had access to advanced medicines and technology, and therefore would have died younger and faster, we would have been unable to survive as a species into the modern age without some sort of deistic intervention. I'm pretty sure that's what you're saying, but I'm not 100%. So I am going to be talking about what I think you're saying. I apologize if this is wrong. First, historically, yes, humans lived a much shorter lifespan than we do now because they lacked the developments we've had over the last several hundred years, and more babies died before reaching childhood, much less adulthood. However, all it takes for a species, any species, to survive is that enough members of that species live long enough to breed and pass on their genes. Coyotes, wolves, dolphins, praying mantises, butterflies, spiders all live in the wild without medicine and technology. But the species survive because enough individuals live to the age where they can breed. Additionally, diseases are a selection pressure that is well understood and a part of natural selection process. And while diseases are bad for the individual, in some cases they can actually be good for the species by selecting individuals who survived better and passed on their genetic code, which allowed their offspring to also survive. Look at sickle cell disease. It's a heritable condition with several variations. The disease can be mild and cause little to no problems for a carrier, or it can be severe and lead to death at a very young age. However, carriers, particularly heterozygous carriers, those with only one copy of this gene, have a significantly higher resistance to malaria, which is endemic in Africa. So here we have one disease that can in and of itself be mild to fatal, leading to the ability to better survive another disease which prior to the invention of quinine in modern medicine had a very high mortality rate. So sickle cell disease can kill, and while even heterozygous carriers often have a shorter lifespan, they live long enough to pass those genes on, and those genes make them and their children more likely to survive malaria, which makes the population overall more likely to survive. So while disease is a challenge to an individual's survival, as a species, the selection pressure of diseases may over the long term affect how a species develops and change. Our modern medicine now gives us the partial advantage over natural selection. We fight back better against diseases, that try to shorten our lifespan and decrease our ability to pass on genetics. These medicines and technologies are why the human population has gone from less than a billion 400 years ago to over 7 billion today. We can fight back.
My second point is that we are the least productive in terms of productivity. A human can have a offspring once a year. So I think it is very much it's a very much valid point that one must consider that why we were not outnumbered by all the other animals. And I think it is very much possible if we would have been outnumbered, we would have been killed on the first place. So I think in terms of productivity, we are the least productive, and it is, I think, beyond imagination for human race to have survived.
So let me guess right. You're saying because we don't breed as much as rabbits that we shouldn't have survived? Well, then how about elephants and giraffes? Elephants have a gestational period of 2 years, and the females don't start breeding until they're 14 years old. Until we humans began hunting them almost to the point of extinction, they were doing pretty good. Giraffes have a gestational period of 13 to 15 months. Velvet worms, which are a bizarre relative of both worms and arthropods, bear live young, and they also carry those young for 15 months. So humans aren't exactly alone in having longer gestational times and having to survive many years before they can reproduce. Now, does our longer gestational period and the time it takes us to get old enough to breed make it harder to repopulate if we have a major species event? Sure. However, particularly in our past, when babies were born, they were at their most vulnerable to the environment, including predators. Being a species that has one child at a time increases the ability of both the mother and tribe to care for the vulnerable child, thus increasing the child's survival rate chances. Nursing only one baby is easier on the mother's health, increasing her survival rate and increasing her ability to have additional children. It's very possible that in the ancient past our gestational period varied more than it does now. Prior to modern medical intervention, those mothers who gave birth to younger fetuses than average had children that would have been less likely to survive the first few months of life. So those genetics would have been less likely to move forward. Those mothers that could carry the fetuses longer gave their fetuses the better survival ability to go further in development. Thus, more of those genetics survived. So it's about trade-off of cost versus benefits. And since the human species has once again survived and now has more than 7 billion of us, I think our reproductive rate is actually pretty effective.
Thirdly, I think the kind of disposition that we have, the modern, educated, philosophical, scholarly man, today we foster hatred, jealousy. We fight in the name of nationalism. We fight in the name of religion. So I think the kind of tendencies that we have, the disposition that we have, I think we would have been killed each other because of the kind of nature we have and the means of the resources that were available to human, even not to, 3 billion years ago, but if you just think in terms of 100 years or 200 years, just imagine man didn't have anything at his disposal. So I think our disposition would not have let us to have survived. So I think it's another big question that how did we survive, even despite the kind of disposition that we have.
I'll be perfectly honest. I'm once again really not perfectly sure what you're driving at. You say that your third point is there was either no natural selection or it wasn't random. If it was intelligent, we wouldn't have risks with intelligence. I think this is where you listed 2 points as one. I think your actual third point is there was either not natural selection or it wasn't random, and the section about intelligence was the fourth point. Now, having said that, I have no idea how there was either no natural selection or it wasn't random links at all with your discussion about tribalism, jealousy, and man's overall disposition. I'm mostly going to choose to address the words you said in your video. So let's talk about the concept of tribalism. Yes, there is some indication that natural selection has given us a tendency toward tribalistic behavior. However, overall, that ends up being a huge genetic advantage for the group, if not occasionally for the individual. The tribe takes care of each other, helps each other survive, drives off predators, hunts foods, etc., so on and so forth. The more a group cooperates, the larger the tribe, the more they can do, the more offspring survive, the more the genetics pass forward. And yes, that tribalism leads to horrible things like tribes seeing other tribes as threats, but in order for the fighting between tribes and individuals to have caused a long-term problem, the fighting must have destroyed almost every single member of the species. Unless you completely and utterly destroy every single tribe at the same time, there's always somebody left to repopulate. And as we spread out across Africa and into Middle East, Europe, and Asia, the ability for all the tribes to be wiped out by fighting at the same time disappeared. At least until the modern age, when we could nuke the whole planet and in theory kill all humans, resulting in ecological disaster. And one last side point about what you wrote in your descriptive box. Evolution by natural selection is not a random process. While specific mutations in the genetic code may occur randomly, whether or not that mutation survives and passed on depends on if the trait that expresses it hinders an animal's ability to survive and pass on genetics. That's not a random process, it's an environmental factors affecting outcome.
Fourthly, I think that natural selection would not have risked us with intelligence. Now, the point that they say that natural selection was random, it was not intelligent. I think it was intelligent because there are just two categories. One is the human category, the intelligent, and the other, and all the others. They are instinctive. So I think if natural selection was intelligent, then that won't have risked us with intelligence. And if it was intelligent because it has just two categories. One is human, the intelligent, and the other is all the other animals are instinctive. So I think natural selection would not have risked us with intelligence, and it.
Okay, just a reminder, even though I just said it, natural selection is not a conscious process. If you think otherwise, provide verifiable proof. It's actually the result of environmental influences placing stressors on a population, leading to the survival of different mutations. Intelligence, particularly the kind that helps with problem solving, is a clear mutational advantage for any species, particularly species that has predators of its own or is a predator and must hunt. Problem solving helped us do that. And given how many humans are on the planet, again, it helped us do it really, really well. On top of that, I'd like to point out humans are not the only intelligent species on the planet. We are currently just the most intelligent and apparently the most arrogant, but there are numerous animals with problem solving intelligence. Intelligence is a continuum. It's not an on-off switch. It's not an either-or proposition. That is showing some really bad understanding of how brains and animals actually work. For example, look at chimps. They form complex social groups just like humans. They have seen making spears to hunt smaller mammals and primates. They use rock to open nuts. That is problem solving and tool making. Certainly not to our level, but since even humans in the intelligent world are intelligent on a scale, making tools is certainly part of that intelligence scale. Elephants also work in social groups. They have been seen cooperating to overcome obstacles and can recognize themselves in mirrors, showing self-awareness. Again, that's a certain level of intelligence, not ours, but it's on the scale. Lion cubs, as well as having predatory hunting instincts, are taught how to improve hunting from their lionesses. They learn from unsuccessful hunts. Learning is part of intelligence. If you only operate on instincts, you don't learn from your mistakes. Much further down on the intelligence scale is actually a fish called the warasi, I'm not sure how to pronounce that has been observed using rough tools to open clams. They dig the clams up and they repeatedly take them back to the same stone to break them. That's just a few examples. We could go on. Clearly, intelligence, learning, and tool making is a survival advantage for many species, and many species have varying levels of intelligence.
Takes me to the fifth point, that human, in terms of strength, in terms of size, I think the least, the most feeble creature of all the species that is known to human.
So you're saying that unless a species is the most mighty thing on the planet, it should no longer exist. Okay, butterflies? Not a lot of size and physical prowess there. Still have those? How about snails? Pretty slow moving and easy target, but we have those. Earthworms, turtles, amoebas, bacteria. All of those species survive in the wild. Some survive in you, and you need them to live. Again, most not particularly powerful, large, or fast. They're just well adapted to their environment. Survival of the fittest does not mean most powerful. It means survival of the species that fits that environment well enough to pass on offspring.
Um, so I think that uh, we if we can understand the point that we would not have survived the natural calamities, earthquakes, floods, and uh, even we are still wiped out by floods up till this day. So it takes me to the last point, that for human, in order to have survived, they must have wings, which we don't have, because with the help of wing, we would have flown all the natural calamities and natural disasters, which we cannot even survive up till this day. I think the point is clear.
Okay, wow, you went full crocodile. Really, you are either showing that you have absolutely no idea how evolution by natural selection actually works, or you're just trolling. Assuming you don't have a clue about evolution, let's start with two things. One, I strongly recommend you go to this Talk Origins page and start reading the articles from the top. It's a good introduction to the basics and has a lot of reference links, and it's free. If you're going to try and debunk evolution, please at least understand the basics. Second, let's be clear that humans are primates, and primates, like us, have no ancestors with any sort of ring structure in our direct evolutionary history. Arms and wings are both forelimbs. We did not come from a path that was slowly turning our forelimbs into wing structures. We turned our forelimbs into arms with fingers for grasping, which allowed us to make tools. That was one of many adaptations that helped us survive. You can see in the diagram how many different versions of the forelimb all use variants of the same bones to do different functions. And you keep bringing up natural catastrophes. For any individual natural catastrophe to wipe out an entire species, that entire species must be in the small area that the catastrophe affects. And the catastrophe must be so severe as to kill the entire population. Even something like a tidal wave only goes inland so far, and a tornado and a hurricane only affect so much area. Africa is large, and as predators who lived in small tribal groups, we would have been spreading out so that we weren't competing with each other. Once we as a species started to spread out both along Africa and then outside of it, it would be almost statistically impossible for an individual natural catastrophe to wipe out our entire species unless it affected the entire globe. You really need to understand that species survival is not concerned with the survival of the individual. It's about the species as a whole. That doesn't mean humans don't care about the survival of the individual, and it doesn't mean atheists don't either. It's talking about a natural process. Okay, so you had 6 not so hot arguments against evolution by natural selection. All of these were actually really easily explained and are included in the process of natural selection. No deity required. I strongly recommend that if you are going to try and attack a science that has so much evidence and information behind it, you should really actually study it. All you did in this video is make it clear that you haven't looked deeply into what science and research actually says. In addition to the Talk Origins article, read Darwin's original book, The Origin of the Species. If you're not a crazy person like me who actually is a fan of Victorian prose, which let's be honest, most people aren't, there is a book called The Origin, Then and Now, an interpretive guide to the origin of the species. It's written by David Resnick. I'll be honest, I haven't personally read this one, but it's supposed to be a really good margin notes version of the book where they place the concepts in modern language, making it easier to read and understand. I'm also personally working through The Ancestor's Tale by Richard Dawkins. Many others recommend The Blind Watchmaker, also by Dawkins. I personally find The Ancestor's Tale more interesting, but for a great understanding for a layperson, read both. I know many theists don't like him because of the God delusion, which I freely admit I haven't gotten around to reading yet, might not ever. In that case, read The Ancestor's Tale and or The Blind Watchmaker and learn what people are actually saying about the science. If you prefer video, AronRa has numerous amazing videos covering this topic. There's his series on foundational falsehoods of creationism, which obviously comes from a fundamentalist Christian point of view, but a lot of your arguments sound very similar. He also has a new series called Systemic Classification of Life that looks at the tree of life. He's a little dry, but he can learn a lot. Even if you read and listened to all of that and then decided that it wasn't real, you would at least be better off and do a more understandable attack against what is being said instead of these horrible misunderstandings about the basics that any halfway read layperson can see through. Last thoughts on your video. Again, a reminder, even if you just proved all of evolution wrong, you didn't prove your God created us. You just proved the current science wrong. You have to provide evidence for a creator deity actually creating life. And then you have to prove that that creator deity is actually the God you worship. You didn't do either. And a question back to you. What if you studied evolutionary science just as a layperson and you came to understand how it works? Would that really change your faith in your God? If it wouldn't, if your God is still real, even if evolution is real, why not accept actual scientific fact with all the evidence it has backing it? If all the scientific evidence has to be false or it causes problem for your God's existence or power, then what kind of God are you actually worshiping? I want to say thank you to the subscribers that I've gotten and all the wonderful people I'm meeting on the YouTube atheistic community. I'm really enjoying the conversations I'm having with both atheists and theists in the comments on mine and other channels. I'm learning a lot, and it's fun to have these conversations. Have a good week.